Good morning Year 12 and welcome back to another video. As promised earlier this week, we've now finished the kind of Supreme Court section and we're now into a separate section that we have to look at, which is civil rights. Okay, so I've added this civil rights folder in the top of the VLE from where we were before. And if you go into there, so far I've got 3 lessons in there. I've got one more to put in, I think, but then that's about it. The first lesson I'm going to look at is the affirmative action and affirmative action sheet that you will have to fill in here. Okay, so this lesson is going to look at what affirmative action is, and also it's going to point you in the right direction for what I would like you to do with that information so far. So if you open the PowerPoint first, the PowerPoint takes you to this. I'm going to just full screen this so we can look at it nicely. Okay, so the TBQ, which we always do obviously, is can I make notes to find out what affirmative action is? Okay, so before we get onto that A3 sheet that I'd like you to fill in, I would like you to make notes on this and make sure that you know what affirmative action is to start with. They're your personal notes that you can use for revision. The A3 sheet, obviously, you could also use for revision, but that is something that I would like you to complete after you've done this, okay? So this is note-taking first, and then you can do the A3 sheet afterwards. So the first thing we need to talk about is what we call opportunity versus results, okay? How do we judge what equality is, okay? That's the idea. So the 20th century has seen an ongoing argument between what's called the equality of opportunity on one side and the equality of results on the other side. Okay, so from the middle of the century, many civil rights advocates came to believe that minority rights and representation could not be guaranteed by solely giving the rights to people. Okay, that's called equality of opportunity. This would only give the theory of rights and equality, not actual rights and equality. If people wanted to see the practice of rights and equality, they had to work towards equality of results. And the only way to overcome racial disadvantage was by introducing racial advantage through policies such as busing, quotas, and affirmative action. We'll come to what those are in a minute. But the most important and enduring was affirmative action. Okay, and that's why we're making a whole PowerPoint about it, and that's why you need to know what it is. So, the debate, okay, about whether it should be equality of opportunity or the equality of results. The idea of this is, let's take a glass of water, for example. Everybody has the chance to completely fill their glass of water. Alright? The tap doesn't shut off, the glass holds the right amount of water. Everybody has a chance to fill their glass, okay? But not everybody does. And according to people on one side of the argument, that is not true equality. If you don't fill your glass, if the same amount of people don't fill their glass from whatever minority they sit in, then that is not equal. You should have an equality of results that shows equality. So everybody should fill their glass. It's not that they should be able to fill their glass, but everybody should fill their glass. That's the idea. And there's lots of methods to kind of get equality of results, like busing, quotas, and affirmative action. So busing was the mandated movement of school children between racially homogeneous neighbourhoods. Okay, so white suburbs and black inner cities. Okay, so the idea is that you take the racially segregated areas of these cities, because this white suburbs and black inner cities is a reality in a lot of American cities, and you take the African Americans out of the inner city and you take them to a school in the white suburbs. And the idea of this was to give the African Americans and other minorities as well the better education, in inverted commas, than they would get in their inner city schools. You could also use quotas, which was a certain percentage of places in like higher education or employment is reserved from people from disadvantaged minorities. So for example, in a lot of American universities, although this has technically been outlawed now, but it hasn't, in a lot of American universities, 10%, let's say, of places will go to African Americans. 10% of places will go to Hispanic people. 10% of places will go to East Asians. Okay, and the rest of the places will be for American white people. That's another way of ensuring equality of results, because you will always get 10% are African Americans. That fulfills that result. 10% are Hispanic, so that fulfills that result. But the most enduring and the most used way of ensuring equality of results is affirmative action, which is a program of giving previously disadvantaged minority groups a head start in higher education or employment. Now, affirmative action can include things like busing and quotas. It is part of that, but it also includes lots of other measures that give disadvantaged groups a head start. A lot of times in American universities, what you'll see is instead of going 10% is African Americans, 10% Hispanic, which is quotas, instead they'll use affirmative action, which is where they pick from a pool of African Americans first. Okay, so they'll pick the top 5% of the African Americans, then pick the top 5% of Hispanic people, then pick the top 5% of East Asian people, then to pick the top 5% of white people, and then they do the rest of the cohorts. And the idea is that then you will always get some people in there. It's not a quota because they're not trying to fill the places. It's a affirmative action, so they're definitely picking some people from every minority. It's really complicated, but if you can get your head around it, it does make sense. So let's go into more of an idea of what it is in practice. Many Democrat politicians believe that the government needed to discriminate positively in favour of African Americans in such areas as housing, education and employment in what became known as affirmative action programs. Many civil rights organizations had become convinced that the burdens of racism could only be overcome by taking race into account and designing suitable remedies. Groups which had been disadvantaged were now to be advantaged. In Britain, we call it positive discrimination, because we have a way with words over here. Rights themselves would not deliver change to society. Benefits had to be added for people. So, affirmative action in education meant busing and quotas. Affirmative action in employment meant preferential hiring practices for minority groups. And affirmative action was meant to lead to diversity and multiculturalism. The view that the school, the college, the firm, the workplace should reflect the racial diversity of the nation. And that is what's called equality of results. I remember vividly when we went to the House of Parliament and we talked to that lovely teacher who talked us through a lot of representation issues. As soon as she said she was for positive discrimination of having female candidates, a lot of people got quite outraged about that. I remember that very well. And this is a similar thing. Okay, this is what they do in America, but because America has a much more, how can I word this? They've had a lot of issues with race over the years due to civil rights and things like that. And so this affirmative action is a reaction to the kind of history of America and the history of civil rights issues and abuses and if you go far back enough, slavery. And so they try and divert and revert this history that they've got through affirmative action. We have the same issue with female rights. I mean, you think of the suffragettes in Britain and things like that. We have those same historical kind of prejudices, and we try and remedy that through positive discrimination. So you can draw the kind of comparison between the US and the UK in this. Obviously, there's opposition to this. More conservative groups and many Republican politicians come to believe that affirmative action programs were both patronising to minorities and actually unfair to majorities. And they believe the Constitution and federal and state laws should always be colourblind. Okay, the idea is that it shouldn't matter what you look like. It shouldn't matter who you are. Everybody should have the open kind of opportunity to do anything. And it shouldn't matter that you shouldn't have these quotas to try and fulfill. Children and minority families should certainly be given equal opportunity to attend a school of their choice, but busing or quotas to achieve and artificially racially balance these schools was wrong. In employment, by all means open up all jobs to all applicants regardless of race, but numerical targets and goals and quotas are off limits. That's equality of opportunity. And as we shall see, it's largely up to the Supreme Court to kind of umpire between these two views of American society. It is very split. So, what do you think? This was kind of set up for last year's group where there's only 5 of them. But I would like you to work on what you think. What's your opinion? Okay? I want you to come up with an argument to say whether you believe in equality of opportunity or equality of results. And why do you think that it should be equality of opportunity or equality of results? If we were at school now, we would have a debate about this. Okay, and I would split you onto both sides, and we would debate which side. So what I would ideally like you to do is come up with what your judgment would be, but also come up with the counter arguments as well, as if we were going to do the debate. But obviously we can't do that, unfortunately. The A3 sheet. This is the A3 sheet. This is what I'd like you to fill in. Has affirmative action been a success? What is it? How does it fit with public opinion? What should we do with affirmative action in the future, and has it been good for America? Those are the 4 questions I'd like you to answer in the boxes. And if you need the pages because you don't have a textbook, I've put them on the end of this PowerPoint as well. So they are there. If you need help with any of that, let me know. I don't expect you to submit any of this to me as work. The only things I expect are the 3 exam questions, which I've got from most people now, and I'm halfway through about marking them. So, as I said, this is something that you need to know about the for the exam. It's something that is an important thing that we have to know about to do with civil rights, but also with the Supreme Court, because we'll come back to how the Supreme Court kind of mediates on this argument. But again, you don't need to actually send any of it to me. If you need any help with anything, please email me. The line of communication is always open. If you want to talk to me on Teams, please do. That's also fine. But overall, again, as usual, stay safe, and thanks for watching Year 12. Goodbye.